It all began early in our marriage when Sheila and I were still learning to live together. We were two young people trying to balance love and daily life. The early years brought small victories, buying our first home, raising two energetic boys, and settling into suburban routines. But over time, cracks appeared in our seemingly perfect life. Sheila was always the adventurous one, pushing boundaries, while I preferred routine. As our differences grew, we drifted apart. I focused on work and fatherhood, while Sheila sought excitement elsewhere, pulling away from the life we had built. One lazy Sunday, I wandered through Home Depot, passing time. Part of me knew I should be at church, but browsing tools seemed more appealing. I had no pressing needs, but it was a better way to spend the day than golf. As I wandered, I ran into Barry Bartell, a family friend. We weren't very close, but we could easily chat over coffee. Coincidentally, his wife, Greta, and my wife, Sheila, were leaving the next morning for a week-long Caribbean cruise. Since Barry couldn't get time off work, Sheila insisted I stay home with the kids while she and Greta enjoyed their vacation. She said I'd just be a third wheel and that they'd save money sharing a cabin. I wasn't thrilled, but didn't want to argue. You can probably guess where this is going. Barry and I ended up in the pest control aisle. "Sorry you couldn't join the cruise," Barry said, sounding genuinely disappointed, but he was the one who couldn't get time off. What was he expecting? "I've already taken the week off. I'll use the time to paint the kitchen while they're away," I replied. "Sheila told me you couldn't get off work." "I work for my father, John. I can leave whenever I want. I was ready to go when Greta told me you couldn't make it," Barry explained. We stood in awkward silence until an elderly man on a motorized cart grumbled at us to move. "Want to grab some coffee?" I asked. "Sure," Barry agreed. We spent 2 hours at McDonald's, quickly realizing our wives had planned a cruise without us. The big question was why. We both avoided the obvious until we couldn't anymore. Eventually, I broke the silence. "So, Barry, are they bringing along 2 men or planning to meet some strangers?" I asked, suspicion in my voice. He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Want a Danish?" he offered, trying to change the subject. He wasn't avoiding the question, just stalling. We grabbed fresh buns and more coffee. "I can't imagine Greta hooking up with a stranger, so it must be a prearranged meeting," Barry speculated. "I hate to admit it, but I agree. Why would they go on a trip like this? Wouldn't it be easier to find someone local?" "Maybe," I responded, still processing. "I've always trusted Sheila and never thought she'd be involved with someone else. Why would 2 mothers with school-age kids even consider this?" We sipped our coffee in silence, staring out the window. "John, it's probably a couple of guys from work. Sheila and Greta both work at International Casualty Insurance," Barry suggested. His explanation made sense. "Is there anything we can do to stop this? If they're comfortable enough to go on a cruise with these men, we might already be too late." "You think they've already been unfaithful?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I hate to say it, but I'm starting to think so," Barry admitted. He got up, irritated after paying 27 cents for a glass of ice. We added ice to our scalding coffee and sat quietly. Now that I think about it, Greta's been working late a lot recently, evenings and weekends. I hadn't thought much of it before, but now I'm seeing your point. I won't stop Sheila from going, but I'm not just going to sit here and do nothing either. I finished my Danish pastry and tossed the remaining coffee into the trash. "Barry, let's meet here tomorrow, right after the girls leave for the airport. We've got some planning to do. Make sure not to say anything to Greta that might tip her off." Barry gave me a thumbs up as I headed out the door. It seemed like he planned to stay and finish his coffee. He didn't look happy. When I got home, everything seemed normal. Our 2 sons, Todd, 9, and Jason, 10, were glued to the TV. I thought they should be outside, but I had long given up on that battle. Sheila was acting just like she always did. I sat down with the newspaper while she prepared a late lunch. I expected her to talk about her trip, but she seemed to avoid the topic altogether. Naturally, that was suspicious. After lunch, I finally took the boys outside to play some soccer, while Sheila was busy packing inside. She insisted on getting everything ready so she could leave without any issues in the morning. I smiled, glancing back at the house now and then. How had I missed this? How foolish had I been? Why didn't I see it sooner? "Todd, Jason, I'll be painting the house next week while your mom's away. How about you spend the week with Grandma and Grandpa Connor?" I didn't wait for a reply. They both ran straight into the house, and within 10 minutes, they were packed. My parents had a farm 20 miles out of town, and they had horses. It wasn't a tough sell. Sheila grumbled a bit, but didn't put up much of a fight. When I got back, dinner was already on the table. After freshening up, Sheila went to take a shower. Naturally, this gave me the chance to quickly check her bags. My suspicions were confirmed when I noticed 3 things. First, most of her sleepwear seemed out of place, especially if she was just with Greta. The second red flag was a new orange bikini hidden in her makeup bag. But the most alarming find was the 210 packs of rubbers tucked away in a case. I couldn't help but wonder why my wife would need rubbers on a cruise. I scolded myself for even having such thoughts. Sheila mentioned wanting a good night's sleep before the trip, while I had decided to binge-watch some Steven Seagal movies. Unfortunately, I didn't have international coverage on my cell phone, unlike Sheila, who had a work phone with international coverage. Though I couldn't call her, she promised to check in daily, or if anything came up. I reassured her not to worry, explaining that if I didn't answer, I might be at my parents' house with the boys, or busy painting. My words seemed to comfort her as I dropped Sheila off. Greta was already at the terminal, smiling and waving at me. As Sheila joined her, I looked forward to seeing Barry. After parking, Barry walked up with a couple of cups of coffee, complaining about the ice. "John, please tell me you have some good news," Barry pleaded. I could only shake my head no. Greta packed 2 new dresses and lingerie that most women would find embarrassing. Worse, I found a new bikini and a large number of rubbers. It didn't even cross my mind to search her makeup bag. I'm not sure whether I'm relieved I didn't find anything else or regret not searching more thoroughly. Barry and I spent the next 20 minutes commiserating over our situation. Once we finished our coffee, it was time to focus on business. Our first stop was International Casualty Insurance, where we informed the receptionist that we needed to speak with Kermit Templeton, the head of human resources. Barry and I had known Kermit since high school. We weren't close, but we got along. "Oh no," Kermit didn't look thrilled to see us. "Can you close the door?" Barry and I settled into some uncomfortable chairs. "Do you know why we're here, Kermit?" "I have a pretty good idea," he replied, clearly not happy about it. Barry and I exchanged a smile, but Kermit remained serious. "We were hoping you could give us the number of employees on vacation this week." "Is that a question?" Kermit asked, his tone turning stern. Our smiles quickly faded. Kermit's demeanor shifted as he typed on his computer. He sighed and mentioned Sheila and Greta. 14 employees are on vacation." "Can you print out a list for us?" Barry asked. "No, but I can give you the information you need," Kermit replied, typing a few more commands. The printer next to him whirred to life. Handing us 2 sheets of paper, he watched our reactions. The pages contained details about Clayton Mankiw and Calvin Bostic. Barry and I quickly skimmed the documents and then looked at Kermit. "These 2 were on the same cruise as Greta and Sheila. We don't need to see the rest of the list. Was that what you were asking?" "Out of curiosity, do you know the pairings?" Barry asked. Kermit placed a photo of Calvin in front of Barry and another in front of me. He seemed reluctant to say more. "Does anyone else know about this?" I pressed. Kermit hesitated, but eventually admitted, "Everyone knows. I thought the company had a policy against this." "Yes, but it only applies if there's a complaint." "And then what? Usually just a warning," Kermit explained. "And if we push for more?" Barry asked, leaning in. "You're not planning to make this difficult for me, are you?" Kermit asked, sounding worried. Barry and I exchanged a look. No words were needed, but it was clear we were on the same page. "Kermit, if those 4 are still employed here next week, we will take legal action. We don't have all the details yet, but it's inevitable. We'll arrange for our attorney to contact you or your legal department, whichever you prefer," Barry stated firmly. "Any inquiries? I'm sorry about this situation." We didn't take any action since the relationship was consensual. No one was coerced or forced into anything. While we're not sure about the extent of the relationship, we acknowledge its existence. "We didn't act because no one had filed a complaint until now," Kermit explained, trying to cover his tracks. "Yes, Kermit, it's official. You fire all 4 of them and we won't take legal action. But if nothing is done, you should expect a lawsuit, and it will be very public," I stated, making our position clear. Barry and I stood firm before leaving. We shook hands with Kermit as we walked out through the main entrance. Barry glanced at me. "So what's our next move?" "I think we should see the lawyer first. Then we can grab lunch and head to the local travel agency," I suggested. As we parked and headed toward the lawyer's office, Barry suddenly stopped. I looked at him and shrugged. "What's up, John?" "What exactly are we going to ask the lawyer to do for us?" he asked, looking worried. "What do you mean?" I replied, confused. "Well, I think once we walk through that door, it'll cost us a lot. And all we'll end up with is a lighter wallet. We'll get divorced. We'll be free from those cheating women. But think about it. We'll be stuck paying alimony, still making mortgage payments, losing custody of the kids, and then paying child support. All the bills will fall on us, and the court will probably make us keep them on credit cards and cell phones. By the time it's over, we'll also be financing our kids' college education. And what do we get out of it? Nothing, as far as I can see. Why would anyone in their right mind want a divorce? The only reason I can think of is to stay connected with their kids. That's the whole trade-off. Damn it, Barry. I love my kids. I don't want to lose them. I get it. I'd be devastated if I couldn't see my daughters again. But I don't want to be financially ruined just because my wife was unfaithful. After what's happened, the fairest thing would be for us to get custody and hold them accountable. But that seems unlikely, Barry replied, clearly sharing my concerns. It feels like we're being forced into a corner, I said, feeling trapped. We both stood silently in the parking lot. John, who in the world came up with these unfair laws? It's just not right, Barry added, frustrated. We turned and walked back to our cars. Barry, I have to admit, Sheila is a great mother. If I had to raise the kids, I don't think I could do as good a job as she does. Yeah, I get it. Same goes for Greta. She's a loving mother and the girls adore her. It liquidates me to say it, but she's a better parent than I could ever be, even though she cheated, Barry admitted. We both fell silent again. I leaned against my car, absent-mindedly kicking the gravel, while Barry fiddled with the zipper on his jacket. John, want to grab some ribs? We shared a full rack and downed 3 beers each. To pass the time, we switched to coffee and indulged in banana pudding. Once we sobered up enough to drive, we headed to Good Times Travel Agency. Nancy Rayburn, an old family friend turned former friend, ran the place. Everyone in our circle relied on Nancy to plan their trips. Loyalty was the only thing keeping her in business, as the internet wiped out her competition. As we walked in, it was clear from her expression that she didn't need to say anything. Barry and I sat down, grinning as we faced the cause of our troubles. The other 2 agents with Nancy quickly excused themselves for lunch. One of them left a brown bag on his desk. It was obvious everyone in the office knew the situation and was trying to distance themselves. We waited in silence, not saying a word. Nancy smiled, trying to get comfortable in her chair, but failing. Finally, she couldn't hold back. "How can I help you gentlemen today?" Nancy asked, her voice shaky. Barry and I exchanged a look and let out a loud chuckle, loud enough for Nancy to hear. I leaned in and spoke quietly. "You have 5 minutes to spill everything, or we'll cause such a scene that the police will have to treat this place like a crime scene. Come on, guys, give me a break. I won't tell you anything more than what your wives have already shared. You wouldn't do anything crazy, would you?" Nancy pleaded, trying to keep control. Barry stood up and turned toward the office entrance. 2 other agents and a couple planning a trip were there. "Listen up, everyone. I suggest you step outside for a few minutes because we're about to rearrange the furniture." "John." "Barry, hold on. All right, what do you want? Just don't get me or the office in trouble. I don't need any more problems," Nancy said, sounding desperate. "Good times," Barry muttered. The agency was a franchise, and Nancy had faced some issues over the past year. She didn't want any more attention. Barry gestured for everyone to relax and sit back down. "Nancy, who else is with Sheila and Greta?" I asked directly. "John, there are over 1,000 people on that ship. You know what I mean," Nancy replied, trying to dodge the question. "Nancy, who else from International Casualty is on the ship?" I pressed, my patience thinning. "I can't tell you that," she said firmly. "Nancy, what rooms are Sheila and Greta in?" Barry asked, his voice calm but insistent. "They're booked in room 113 on the sunset deck," she answered, her voice shaky. "That's not what I asked, is it?" I retorted, my frustration growing. "Damn it, John, what are you trying to do? What do you want from me?" Nancy snapped, exasperated. "Which rooms are Calvin Bostic and Clayton Mankiw in?" I demanded, slamming my fist on the desk. Nancy hesitated, her face showing concern as she stammered. "Bostic and Mankiw are in room 115 on the sunset deck," she finally admitted, barely audible. Barry leaned across the table, locking eyes with Nancy. "Nancy, Calvin is sharing a room with my wife Greta," he said, his voice cold. Nancy trembled, trying to push her chair away from the table. "Greta and Calvin are sharing a room," and Calvin's frustration was clear when he hit the table. "Both Greta and Calvin are in room 113, and Sheila and Clayton are in room 115. But I'm not the one who arranged this. Someone else did. I just followed orders." Nancy, realizing she had revealed too much, abruptly stopped speaking and handed us the documents we had requested. It was hard to tell if she was on the verge of tears, but as we prepared to leave, I turned to her and stressed the importance of not contacting anyone, whether on the ship or elsewhere, about our visit or our conversation. I warned her that doing so would have severe consequences for her business. As we left the building, Barry expressed uncertainty about our next steps. I admitted I didn't have a concrete plan. It just seemed like the right thing to do at the time. Barry decided to leave his 2 daughters, Grace and Marie, with his sister Beth, who also had 2 teenage girls. Once everything was settled, he planned to join me at the house. We spent the evening reviewing brochures and schedules, which helped us shape our plan. We both acknowledged that our marriages were beyond repair, and our main focus shifted to our children's well-being. We loved them deeply and considered how the divorce would affect their lives, especially our responsibilities. We agreed not to pursue formal divorce proceedings. Instead, we would each decide how best to care for our kids. I hoped that once things settled, I could arrange to live with Sheila and the kids, ensuring their basic needs were met without financially supporting Sheila. This would take careful planning. If everything worked out, I planned to cover their college expenses as well. That evening, we needed to address the immediate issues. Thankfully, the cruise ship offered free Wi-Fi. Barry planned to bring his laptop and download all our friends, relatives, and coworkers' contact information, including addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses. Handling cell phones would be tricky, but we decided to tackle that later. The cruise ship was scheduled to arrive in Montego Bay on Wednesday morning. We found an affordable sightseeing flight that would get us there by 7 a.m. that day. Booking a room for the cruise's duration turned out to be easier than expected, and it took less than an hour to arrange a flight to Jamaica and secure a return room reservation. Sheila left a message saying they had settled into their cabin without issues and were already at sea. She asked me to let Barry know that Greta was also on board. The evening was just beginning and we were nearly ready to go. We planned to spend the next day organizing our financial and personal matters, such as bank accounts, bills, credit cards, and belongings. I intended to move all my things to my parents' house for safekeeping, while Barry's brother would take care of his. Fortunately, a colleague from work allowed us to park our cars at his place and gave us a ride to the airport. Although leaving at midnight wasn't ideal, it was necessary. The airport was just a short taxi ride from the cruise ship parking lot. We watched as the sun set behind the market stalls. We only had 2 carry-on bags and Barry's laptop with us. We didn't plan on dressing up, so we packed just the essentials. About 10 minutes later, people began disembarking from the ship. Some headed to the town center, while most made their way to the waiting tour buses in an orderly manner. Everything seemed well coordinated, as if it had been done countless times before. Sheila and Greta walked down the walkway with wide smiles on their faces. The 2 men behind them looked just as pleased, holding hands with our wives. It was clear that these men were Clayton and Calvin. They were attractive, maybe a few years younger than Barry and me, but didn't have the rough, masculine look one might expect. We observed them from our small stools until they all boarded the bus to Dunn's River Falls. Barry greeted the ticket collector with a wave, exchanged a few words with the driver, and then approached us. Jamaicans are known for their bargaining skills, and it took about 5 minutes and $200 to get him to agree to help us. Identifying Sheila and Greta to our new acquaintance was easy, and he happily agreed to take as many photos as possible of the 2 couples at the falls. When we asked for some slightly more daring pictures, he grinned and gave us a thumbs up. The bus was due back at 3 o'clock, and we assured him we would be waiting with the agreed payment. He smiled again, carefully emphasized the quality of his camera, and winked. We realized he wanted an extra $200, far more than the value of a $40 camera. After the buses departed, we boarded to settle into our room for an additional $100. The accommodating clerk registered us under the names Bob Jones and James Moore. If all went well, we would remain incognito for the rest of the cruise. We quickly grabbed some sandwiches and spent the day getting familiar with the ship's layout. Within a couple of hours, we had memorized all the stairs, elevators, and passageways. We planned to avoid the dining room and showroom to minimize the risk of running into our wives. Barry set up his laptop and ran some tests. Thankfully, we had no issues with internet access or email. We briefly considered breaking into our wives' rooms, but decided against it. As we sat comfortably in the same booth as before, the buses began to return, with the one from Dunn's River Falls arriving on time. Barry and I were enjoying a couple of glasses of Red Label when Sheila, Greta, and their companions walked past us. The straw hats we wore probably helped conceal our identities. Our ticket collector approached us, grinning from ear to ear. His smile was full of joy, and he couldn't wait to show us his work, boasting about how well he had done. Barry cut him off by handing him a cold beer. We quickly glanced at the photos. There was more affectionate embracing and kissing than we had expected. I handed him $200 and another beer for the driver. We waited a few more minutes to ensure our wives had left the boarding area, then headed back to our cabin. We had a busy evening ahead, but first, we needed to figure out how to discreetly have dinner. The cabin featured a balcony that provided a view of the entrance to the main dining room. Barry and I settled into comfortable seats where we could observe the passengers lining up for dinner. We speculated that our wives would likely opt for an early dinner to allow more time for evening activities like dancing and entertainment. It didn't take long before the four of them arrived and joined the line. The couples walked hand in hand, appearing as though they were married. Barry gave me a puzzled look as I stood up and made a quick call from the service phone. Within 30 seconds, I returned with a wide grin on my face. Just as the couples were about to be seated, an announcement rang out. "Attention, Barry Bartell. Please join your party on the Lido deck. Barry Bartell." The announcement wasn't overly loud or intrusive, but it was clear enough for everyone to hear. Greta immediately turned her head as if there was a speaker directly in front of her. She stepped aside to let the next group of diners pass by. Greta and Sheila engaged in an animated conversation while Clayton and Calvin stood patiently to the side. Suddenly, Greta pulled out her phone and dialed a number from her speed dial. After 30 seconds, she shook her head, signaling that there was no answer. Sheila then made a call, and when her call also went unanswered, both women looked concerned and entered the dining room. "John, that was brilliant. I'd love to have heard their conversation during that meal, even if it did seem a bit childish," Barry said with a chuckle. We exchanged a quick laugh and then headed to the sunset deck for tacos and margaritas. An hour later, we returned to our room, ready to start our work. Today was crucial since we were set to arrive in Cancun the next morning. Neither of our homes had responded to our calls, and no one knew we were out of town. Even if our parents or Barry's brother had tried to reach us, they wouldn't have known where we were. We transferred all the photos from Dunn's River Falls onto the laptop. Some photos captured all four of them, while most focused on the couples. A few showed physical engaged moments, with Sheila wearing a new orange bikini that had some wardrobe malfunctions on the way to the falls, causing her to giggle. Although a video would have been better, we made do with what we had. Barry created a collage page featuring the best dozen shots, with Clayton and Calvin appearing in all of them. We each picked our favorite photo, and Barry included it in an e-card. The message read, "Having a great time, wish you were here." By 9 o'clock, we had sent out over 200 emails. I was surprised by the number of friends, family, and social contacts we had between us. Naturally, everyone at International Casualty received a set of photos. The sky deck was extremely windy and nearly empty. Barry and I found a quiet, secluded spot where we enjoyed 3 long-necked beers, celebrating the success of our first day. We had no idea what we would do the next day, but since the e-card trick had worked so well, we decided to try it again. We turned in early. The ship offered plenty of fruit, Danish pastries, and coffee for breakfast. We avoided the main dining areas and crowded common spaces, instead using service stairways instead of elevators. Barry and I enjoyed refreshing rum drinks with pineapple on the sun deck at the back of the ship. From there, we had a clear view of the main pool, which was getting busier as we sipped our drinks. On our second round, Sheila and Greta appeared, settling comfortably into a couple of lounge chairs, but Clayton and Calvin were nowhere to be seen. Unsure of what to do, we simply watched. At the other end of the deck, a bored-looking teenager was engrossed in his cell phone. I always found it fascinating how quickly teenagers could text on those devices. I nudged Barry, and together we approached the young guy. It was awkward trying to approach a boy on a cruise ship without seeming odd, but we managed. Eventually, he agreed to let us use his phone for $20. "Hello? Hi, Sheila. It's John. Sorry I missed your call last night. I tried calling home 3 times, I began. "John, your call is showing as coming from Baltimore," Sheila responded, confused. "Sorry, I had to borrow this phone. You know I can't make calls from mine. Is everything okay? Your parents didn't know where you were," she said, sounding concerned. "I'm fine, just busy. Are you having a good time?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, we're having a great time. It's too bad you couldn't join us," she replied, her tone lightening. "All right, say hi to Greta for me. By the way, you look amazing in that orange bikini. I don't remember seeing it before," I added, testing her reaction. "What?" Sheila sounded startled. John and I burst into laughter as I ended the call and handed the phone back to its owner. Barry and I decided to block Sheila and Greta's numbers on their phones. I gave the teenager another $20 and reminded him to keep our encounter a secret. He thought it was cool and readily agreed. Sheila and Greta were searching the ship, trying to find me. Sheila tried to hide behind a large towel as if to avoid being noticed, which was a foolish move. She attempted to call the number we had used twice, but eventually gave up. Clayton and Calvin arrived shortly after. Barry headed straight to the service phone on the sun deck. A few minutes later, he returned to the railing with a wide smile. "Attention. Barry Bartell, please join your group at the shuffleboard court. Barry Bartell, please join your group at the shuffleboard court." Upon hearing the announcement, there was a flurry of activity near the pool. Greta and Sheila quickly gathered their belongings and made their way to the shuffleboard court on the port side of the yacht, while Clayton and Calvin just stood there looking annoyed. We watched our wives from above as they waited for half an hour before heading back. As they walked back to their room, Sheila pulled out her phone and made a call. From the look on her face, we could tell the postcards had reached home. We didn't know who she was talking to, but it didn't matter. Everyone who knew us now had pictures of Sheila and Greta with their boyfriends. They lingered on the deck for a few minutes, checking the display on Sheila's phone, before heading to the cabin deck. Clayton and Calvin attended dinner that evening without their female companions and spent the rest of the night drinking at the cabaret bar on the lagoon deck. Barry and I sat in a secluded corner, enjoying beer and pizza, and they never noticed us. We thought about moving closer to eavesdrop on their conversation, but decided against it. Our wives never showed up. Around midnight, both men left the bar, clearly drunk, and had to be helped back to their cabins by several crew members. We never found out how they slept, but it didn't matter to us. The next morning, we were on the sun deck, enjoying breakfast with fresh fruit and coffee as the Diamond Sunset docked in Cancun. Most of the passengers gathered on the promenade deck, eager for the day's activities. We still hadn't decided on our plans for the day. It seemed foolish to follow the two couples ashore. However, that became irrelevant when Sheila and Greta were among the first to disembark with their luggage. They weren't going on a day trip. They were leaving the cruise entirely. While the other tourists boarded the tour buses, Sheila and Greta hailed a cab and left quickly. Barry and I exchanged a final look, unprepared for this unexpected turn of events. We'd assumed our wives would try to find us on the boat, given its limited size, but they made no attempt to do so. Clayton and Calvin also left the ship, boarding a tour bus, leaving us uncertain of their intentions. We enjoyed a leisurely lunch in the nearly empty dining room. With one more stop before returning to Grand Cayman, we needed to rethink our strategy. Perhaps another relaxed lunch in the dining room was in order later. Despite most passengers being ashore, Sheila and Greta's departure made no difference. The atmosphere became more relaxed and enjoyable. The ship was set to leave Cancun that evening and arrive in the Cayman Islands the following afternoon. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for a serious conversation. Talking to Clayton and Calvin was necessary, but Barry and I weren't sure what to say. As we entered the formal dining room, we noticed our wives and their partners had secured a table for 4 with 2 empty seats. Barry and I waited until Clayton and Calvin were seated before approaching and taking the empty seats. No one objected or questioned our presence. "Good evening, gentlemen. I assume you know who we are," I began. Calvin gave a slight nod, while Clayton's expression showed his displeasure at our arrival. Calvin appeared uneasy and unsure, while Clayton was visibly irritated. "Gentlemen, Mr. Bartell and I won't be joining you for dinner. With only 3 days left on the cruise, we thought it wise to advise you to be cautious." I noticed Barry chuckling, but I chose to ignore it. Calvin seemed intrigued, while Clayton grew more agitated. It's worth noting that 222 people go overboard on cruises each year and are never found. After a brief pause for emphasis, Barry and I stood up and left the dining room. We could hear Calvin talking as we walked away, but we couldn't make out his words. We opted for tacos and beer for dinner. Due to the strong wind, we stayed inside, but the sunset through the lounge windows was stunning. "Well, John, that was quite the scene. I'm not entirely sure what you were aiming for, but you definitely got their attention," Barry remarked, still amused. "I'm not sure either. Let's regroup tomorrow and figure out our next move," I suggested. Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. "Gentlemen, I am Mr. Sorensen. May I have a moment of your time?" Barry and I turned to face the imposing Nordic crewman who had approached us, with 2 other crew members standing silently nearby. I glanced at Barry, and we exchanged smiles before nodding at this figure of authority. "Am I speaking to Mr. Jones and Mr. Moore, or to Mr. Bartell and Mr. Connor?" Sorensen asked. "Bartell and Connor," I replied, seeing no point in hiding our identities. "Some passengers reported that you threatened to throw them overboard. Can you explain their accusations?" Sorensen inquired. "No, we didn't threaten them. We simply mentioned some statistics about maritime accidents. In fact, we advised them to be careful," I clarified. "It was a subtle threat, and you both know it," Sorensen countered. Why would we do something like that? Barry asked, feigning innocence. Sorensen gestured toward a quiet corner, and we followed. Gentlemen, did you threaten Mr. Bostic and Mr. Mancow? Barry and I exchanged glances and seemed to come to an agreement. Yes, though it wasn't phrased as a threat, our words were intended that way, I admitted. Was there a specific reason for that implied threat? Sorensen asked, now serious. Absolutely, and you played a part in that reason, I replied. Sorensen's expression suggested he was expecting a fuller explanation. Mr. Sorensen, Nordic Cruise Lines arranged for these two men to share cabins with our wives for the week. Mr. Bostic was with Mrs. Bartell, while Mr. Mancow shared a stateroom with my wife. It appears Nordic Cruise Lines is hosting a cruise with entertainment at sea for married women seeking to spend time with their lovers. While I understand that you are likely legally protected from such situations, this feels incredibly distressing to me. Mr. Connor, I understand your frustration with your wife's actions, but surely you don't believe that the cruise line endorses or supports such behavior. We pride ourselves on being a family-oriented company and are committed to maintaining that reputation, Sorensen responded, attempting to calm the situation. Barry and I stayed silent in response to Sorensen's questions. Although we had plenty to say, we chose to keep quiet. We leaned back in our chairs, exchanged smiles, and watched as Sorensen, though slightly flustered, maintained control of the conversation. Regrettably, we'll need to report this matter to the proper authorities. They may have questions for you, he stated. Which authorities? We're at sea. Aren't you the authority in this situation? I asked, pushing back. Mr. Connor, Mr. Bartell, I kindly request that you avoid any further interactions with Mr. Mancow and Mr. Bostic for the remainder of the cruise. Can you assure me that there will be no disturbances before we reach Miami? Sorensen asked, his tone firm. Barry and I nodded, smiling as we agreed. The group left, and we found ourselves alone in the room. We spent the evening drafting emails to various media outlets, embellishing details, and including photos we knew wouldn't be published. The next morning, we enjoyed a hearty breakfast in the dining area. Clayton and Calvin were nowhere to be seen. Later, as the ship docked at the Grand Cayman Islands, we walked by their cabins and noticed the breakfast dishes left outside their doors. We saw Calvin disembark with his luggage, bidding farewell to the ship, leaving his maid behind. Barry and I decided to spend the day on land, even though there wasn't much to see. However, we did have a great time swimming with manta rays, the only activity on the trip not motivated by revenge. In the evening, we enjoyed another satisfying dinner. Clayton was still missing. I briefly considered that he might have left the ship after us, but I doubted it. Barry had received more than 30 email responses to the postcard we sent out. Most were lighthearted and filled with laughter, but a few criticized our actions as despicable. We were pleased to see that our message had reached its intended audience. Friends and acquaintances found it amusing, but our family members were not pleased. Sheila and Greta had not sent any messages. Since we were returning home the next day, we made sure to fully charge our phones before bed. We also sent out 32 press releases, even though we had no idea how to properly prepare or distribute them. Among those, we sent 2 to Piccolo World Tours, the company that owns the Good Time Travel Agency franchise. We may have gone a bit too far, accusing Nancy Rayburn of organizing trips for married housewives to have romantic escapades with their boyfriends, but we felt she deserved it. The rest of the story ended up in newspapers and on TV exposé shows. Hopefully we'll get some sort of response. It had been a good day, and we slept well that night. The next morning, we had breakfast on the Lido deck. After we finished, Barry turned on his phone. I had one missed call from my father. We each made our first calls since the trip began. Dad, it's John. I saw you tried to reach me. What's going on? Well, son, I assume you know more about this than I do. All I know is Sheila arrived on Wednesday and took the kids with her. You asked me not to let her take them, but I couldn't stop it. I later went into the house, but she was gone. The front door was unlocked, so I went in and looked around. Most of her clothes and the kids' clothes were gone. It looked like she left in a hurry. She didn't say where she was going. Jason seemed upset about leaving, but I heard her mention something about Noble's Grove, which seemed to cheer him up. Sheila's sister Loretta lives in Mount Carmel. That's probably where she went. I'll try to find her number and give her a call. John, we got the postcard with the photos. Can you explain what's going on? I think it's pretty clear, Dad. Sheila decided to go on a cruise with a former colleague and left me to care for the kids while she spent time with another man. What do you want me to do, Dad? Did you lock up the house? Yes, I did. That's all I could think of. Barry and I hadn't planned on going home immediately, but the situation had changed. I decided that Sheila should stay in the house with the kids. I had no idea why she left. "What are your plans?" I asked. "I'm not sure, but I think I'll see you in a day or so. I'll keep you posted. Thanks for calling," I replied. I went to pour myself a cup of coffee. As Barry continued his call, he looked unhappy. We had both assumed our wives would be returning home to the kids, and we planned to live elsewhere for a few months while we figured things out. We were considering seeking work in the Pensacola area. Barry returned with a disappointed look on his face. He grabbed a Danish pastry from the buffet and settled into the chaise lounge opposite me. "Wow, you look as thrilled as I am," I commented. Barry forced a weak smile and sighed. "John, she's gone. Greta left and didn't take the kids. She left them with my sister." "What? She left the kids? What did she say?" Beth said she didn't say much. She thanked Beth for watching them and talked to the girls for a few minutes. Beth mentioned her car was packed with clothes. I don't know how she found out I left the kids there. She left alone. "What about the house?" Beth's husband said no one was there. All the furniture and stuff are still there, but Greta's gone. He didn't go inside, but I assume all her clothes are gone. My situation didn't go as planned either. Sheila found out the boys were at my parents' house and took them from there. I think she went to her sister's in Mount Carmel, but I'm not sure. She took all her clothes and the boys' clothes, too. My house seems empty as well, I explained. We sat in silence for a few moments. Barry looked at me with concern. "I know it's early, but I could really use a beer." We spent the rest of our cruise in the Lido Lounge, drinking more beer than usual. As the ship departed, we watched the tired passengers heading home. Although we didn't see the Clayton sale, the place was packed. The friendly bartender informed us the lounge was closing, so we headed back to our stateroom only to find our belongings packed and in the aisle. We were told authorities would meet us for our threatening behavior. We weren't sure what that meant, but no one escorted us off the ship, and no authorities showed up. We had hoped for some media attention, but nothing happened. Barry and I took the last 2 seats in the airport limo van. The cost of last-minute one-way tickets home was steep, but we had no choice. During the flight, we barely spoke. Our plans had gone awry, leaving us both feeling down. Barry still had his kids, but his wife was gone. I, on the other hand, had neither kids nor a wife. Returning to an empty house wasn't pleasant. There were no messages from Sheila at home or on our phones. I called her workplace and found out she no longer worked at International Casualty. I assumed Greta, Clayton, and Calvin were also gone. I spent the first day back cleaning the house and getting rid of Sheila's leftover belongings. Barry was in a similar situation, with only memories of Greta's brief visit to say goodbye to her daughters. We canceled our credit cards and restricted access to our finances. Greta was an adult and could take care of herself, but Sheila had Todd and Jason, and I needed to figure out how to support them. It saddened me that she took them away, but I knew she was their mother and had a responsibility to care for them. Greta didn't seem willing to take that risk. In some ways, it was better for the kids. Barry and his daughter settled into their new home, and things started to return to normal. As expected, Beth took care of the girls while Barry worked and helped with household chores. My life, however, had completely changed. My evenings were now spent watching TV and eating microwave dinners. I did some digging and found out that Calvin Bostic had left town right after being fired. Clayton had also lost his job, but no one knew where he was working or living. I contacted Sheila's sister, Loretta, to find out about the kids, but it was a dead end. Loretta said Sheila stayed one night and then left without telling anyone where she went. I didn't fully believe her, but I had no choice but to trust her until I knew otherwise. Surprisingly, Barry and I drifted apart. He still had a family, while I had nothing. I tried spending time with him and the girls, but it was always awkward. At the start of the new school year, I visited the boys' old school to make sure Todd and Jason's records were transferred correctly. A helpful young woman informed me that the paperwork had been sent to North Chalk Hill Elementary in Frackville 2 weeks earlier. She seemed proud to share this, and I thanked her. I quickly found Sheila's new cell number and had to call 3 times before she finally answered. Caller ID is handy unless someone uses it to avoid you. I kept the conversation brief and asked her to meet me at the food court in Frackville Mall. I waited over 30 minutes for her to arrive. This was our first contact since her cruise, and I avoided mentioning it. By the time she sat down, my large coffee had gone cold. We didn't exchange any greetings, so I broke the silence. "I want you and the boys to move back into the house." Sheila shifted uncomfortably on the plastic seat, her hands empty since she hadn't gotten a drink. "All of us together?" No, just you and the boys. I have a small apartment nearby. The house will be more familiar and comfortable for Todd and Jason. They can go back to their old school and I can see them regularly. I can't afford to live in a house. I'll cover the rent, utilities, food, and household expenses. I'll also handle the boys' clothing and school costs. What about me? Well, Sheila, you're an adult now. I believe you can manage on your own. I need to focus on my work. You can find a job that fits around the boys' school schedule or work evenings so I can watch them. I'm sure you'll find something to keep you busy. She had mixed emotions, and I wasn't sure what she expected or was willing to accept. Her eyes scanned them all as if searching for something. I think she saw both pros and cons in the situation. All right, I'll do it for the boys. You're right, it will be good for them. When should we start? I'll leave in the next few days and you can move in whenever you're ready. The decision was made quickly, faster than my weight in that uncomfortable chair. We sat in silence for a moment. John, is there anything else you want to discuss? That was my cue to leave. I stood up and placed my empty cup on the table. No. As I walked away, I thought I saw a tear in her eyes. When I glanced back, she was still sitting there. The next 6 months passed without major incidents. Sheila found a job that fit her schedule while the boys were in school. I had them on weekends, and she took care of them during the week. Barry received divorce papers from Greta in Nevada, and his daughters were living with him, seemingly doing well with help from his sister and mother. Work was going better than expected, but to advance, I would need to relocate. Given the circumstances, I was hesitant. As Christmas approached, everything fell apart. When I returned from lunch, Todd and Jason were already in the office. What's going on? Why aren't you in school? I asked. The furnace broke down, so we were all sent home, Jason replied, his gaze fixed on his feet. When did you arrive here? I inquired further. We went home first, then decided to come here. The key was under the mat, Todd explained. You could have come in earlier, I remarked, noting their hesitant demeanor. Both kept their eyes on the floor, avoiding my gaze. What's wrong? What are you hiding? I pressed. Jason, stuttering slightly, broke the silence. When we got home, Mom left her bedroom door open. She was in there with that man, Clayton. He was in the bedroom? I asked, seeking clarity. Yes, Dad, they were both unclothed, doing what you see on the internet, Jason confessed. Silenced by shock, I pondered the next steps. How could I erase that image from their minds? Jason handed me his phone, showing me the photos. It only took a second to confirm what they said. Todd added that Clayton had been there several times and that Mom, Sheila, had warned them not to tell me. She said if I got upset, they'd all have to move back to Frackville. After a brief discussion, we decided the boys should move in with me. I handed them the apartment keys and sent them on their way. Then, I headed to Human Resources. Minot, North Dakota, might not be a vacation spot, but there was an immediate job opening, and I was ready. After sorting out finances, I returned to the house. It was empty, likely because Sheila was at work. The unmade bed hinted she had been home for an afternoon nap. Just as I finished packing the boys' belongings, Sheila walked in. John, what's going on? I thought we had an agreement. Where are you taking everything? She demanded. The agreement is off, Sheila. The boys and I are leaving. You can yell all you want, but it won't change anything, I declared firmly. You can't take my boys, John. I won't allow it, and the courts won't either, she protested. I'm taking them. If you want them back, go to court and explain everything, I responded calmly. What are you talking about? She asked, smirking with her hands on her hips. I placed the last bag down and faced her squarely. What did you have for lunch today, Sheila? I asked pointedly. What does that matter? Why do you care? She retorted, still confident. By the way, the furnace at school broke today, I mentioned casually. I'm not following, she confessed, puzzled. The school furnace broke, so all the kids were sent home during lunch. I'll ask again. What did you have for lunch? I repeated, tightening the noose of my inquiry. Her confidence crumbled, and she sank onto the couch, silent. I picked up the last bag and paused at the door. Jason took some pictures. I hope Clayton has health insurance because he'll need it. I let him off last time, but now he'll face the consequences. She didn't cry or faint, just sat there like a zombie. I left without slamming the door. We bought a small trailer and moved out by the end of the week. I passed by Clayton Mackey's house, but the owner said he'd left that day and didn't provide an address. I decided to deal with Clayton later. Sheila did consult a lawyer about custody, but she never contacted me. We settled into our new home, and the boys seemed happy. They never mentioned missing their mother. About 6 months later, I received divorce papers from Nevada. She didn't ask for anything, and I didn't offer anything. It always bothered me that she didn't fight for custody of her sons. I think about it often, but never bring it up. I believe the boys need a mother. Next week I'll start looking for one, and Todd and Jason have agreed to help.